What's poppin'? I am the Kodiak. Now, this video is going to piss a lot of people off. You saw the title, you saw the thumbnail. You know what we're talking about today. We are going to talk about why Joe Mixon is slightly overrated or overvalued as far as fantasy goes. And unless you are in Cleveland, if you're from Ohio, this video might piss you off. If you live in Pittsburgh or Baltimore, probably not going to piss you off as much, but yeah, let's get right into it because we don't have any time to waste talking about why Joe Mixon is overvalued. Do not get me wrong. I think Mixon is a pretty okay to good player. You know, he's pretty talented. He's 24 years old, 25. He catches the ball. He can catch the ball, except they seem to reserve that for Gio Bernard all the time. And he just signed an extension this offseason, and it's going to keep him with the Bengals for another 4 or 5 more years. A lot of the dudes who love Mixon are absolute film grinders because, you know, everything he puts on tape is pretty solid, and people who are number nerds, which I kind of am more towards the number nerd side, but I don't go full neck beard like baseball guys do. Analytic nerds actually really like Mixon too because, you know, he always tops the league in juke rate, and he's pretty much a yards created machine. And his situation in Cincinnati has been really, really bad his entire career. Like, this is probably the best situation we've ever seen him, or at least it's going to be, like, in next coming years. Because for the first time in a really, really, really long time, Joe Burrow has shown that Cincinnati could have actual above-average QB play. Throwback to when Andy Dalton was in his prime. That was probably the best well, I mean, they haven't had a quarterback other than Andy Dalton and a few other guys rotating in and out last year. But when Andy Dalton was in his prime, like 2015 or so, that was the best quarterback play we've seen from Cincinnati in the whole 2010s. And now they definitely have a QB of the future in Burrow. Burrow looks really damn good this year. You know, you think about the offense, you think that they have Burrow, Mixon, Boyd, Higgins, and I have to assume that they're going to add another weapon or two in the draft. But as I was going back to, you know, talking about how he profiles well from an analytic perspective, it's really easy to cherry pick a couple stats here and there. Like I said, he always performs well as far as yards created, but, you know, he's 63rd in true yards per carry this year with 3.5, number 41 in breakaway run rate with 2.5, and number 157 in EPA while seeing a very, very, very low stacked front carry rate considering he's a bell cow running back. And it seems like one of the biggest reasons why people absolutely love Mixon is because they are still riding his college hype from Oklahoma. Like, don't get me wrong, he's still been a good player, but Saquon has averaged 5 yards per carry and 4.6 yards per carry, running behind absolute dog shit lines in New York the past 2 years. Mixon is averaging 4.1 yards per carry in a year where their passing offense is legitimately good. And not to mention, Mixon can catch the ball, but he's been either limited or seriously misused because he's never had more than 300 yards receiving, and he literally has 5 receiving touchdowns his whole career. You know, he's been in that backfield with Giovanni Bernard ever since he entered the league, and it seems like they, as far as like receiving work, they'd prefer to give it to Gio. You know, when week 2 this year, when Browns and Bengals were playing on that Thursday night game, and the Bengals were just getting absolutely thrashed by Chubb and Hunt, it seemed like when the Bengals were down big, they preferred to give the load to Gio. But the problem with us saying that we know that the talent is there and me saying that I still think he's a good running back is when I watch him play, like, I don't know, I don't scour through film through hours like a lot of these other dudes, but I'm really, really not impressed. Like, I'm not going to say I'm not impressed, but he doesn't look particularly special when he's running the ball, if that makes any sense. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because we all said with Leonard Fournette that the talent was there, and then Leonard Fournette is absolutely horrible last year, so horrible that he gets waived and off his own team. Nobody even wants him except for Tampa Bay because they picked him up and he was pretty much free. And James Robinson is doing way, 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 way more, looks way more talented behind, obviously, or arguably the same offensive line and pretty much in the same scheme that the Jaguars were in last year. And I'm not saying that Mixon is Fournette. He's not even close. He's miles better than Fournette as a player. But that's the problem with saying the talent is there. If we keep waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting for like an RB5 season from Mixon, what's going to happen when we don't? And he's suddenly 28, 29, and we still think that he's like in the offseason in May and June. We're still talking about how Joe Mixon could be on track for like a 60 catch season. Like I said, people are just in love with the talent that we saw at Oklahoma. He was a baller running next to Baker Mayfield. The dude probably would have been a first round pick if, I mean, he didn't punch that girl at Golden Corral. But you know what I'm saying. Dalvin Cook is probably in the same boat. But the problem with that is that Dalvin Cook is miles ahead of Joe Mixon as a player. And not only that, but it feels like he can't stay on the field enough, Not just from injuries, but it feels like, well, I mean, he's obviously been hurt this year, but that has nothing to do with this video. But it feels like he always sits out third down because they would just rather use Giovanni Bernard inexplicably. And the reason I say he's overvalued as far as like fantasy is because in dynasty startups this summer, in some dynasty leagues, he was going as the RB6 off the board, only behind CMC, Saquon, Zeke, Kamara, Cook. You look at the guys going after him like CEH, Jacobs, Chubb, Sanders, Taylor, Henry, Dobbins, Eckler, Swift, Jones, Akers, and Drake. And I'm pretty much taking all those guys going behind him besides maybe Dobbins, Aaron Jones, Cam Akers, and Kenyon Drake. So I think a lot of the hype surrounding Mixon last year was because they had a really bad offensive line. And from week 10 onward, when they were starting literally fourth-string quarterbacks, fifth-string quarterbacks, guys that couldn't even cut it on other practice squads, they just gave him the load, like 30 touches a game, 35 touches a game. And I saw a stat that said if you extend, Mixon's workload from the Bengals bye week, from after the Bengals bye week, all the way to, week 17, Joe Mixon would have been on pace for something ridiculous, like 390 touches. But if we look at the numbers, before Joe Mixon got hurt this year, so weeks 1 through 6, Joe Mixon was the RB12 as far as points per game. So in PPR, Mixon is averaging 16.6 points per game. And like I said, this is in a year where their fantasy, passing offense is legitimately actually competent, as opposed to what we've been accustomed to seeing years past, where they're getting 2 or 5 or 4 wins a year. And I'm not sure if you guys remember what happened week 4, but week 4 he played a very, very bad run defense. I mean, it's better than you'd think, but it's still not a great unit as a whole. Joe Mixon played the Jacksonville run defense and managed to get 42 points that week. So if we take out that 42-point performance, he's averaging 11.2 fantasy points a game. And like I said, this is in a year where their passing offense is legitimately not dog shit. That is not worth RB6, RB7, fantasy draft capital. So this year alone, against the Chargers, he got 5 points. That Thursday night game I talked about with the Browns a little bit earlier, he got 12 points. Against the Eagles, he got 8.5. Against the Jaguars, he had that boom week, got 42 points. At Baltimore, he got 15.4, and at Indianapolis, he had 14.9. So, and it's actually pretty crazy because Joe Mixon seems to have a better floor against really good teams than he does against really bad teams, because we know that when they're playing Baltimore, they're going to be behind all game, no question about it. But when they played the Chargers, when they played the Eagles, when they played, the Browns, they were in for a lot of the game. Joe Burrow kept him in that game against the Browns, and he got 5, 12, and 8 points respectively. Whereas when he was playing the Colts and he was playing the Ravens, he got 15 and 14 points. So 7 points a game is not a huge difference. That's for an individual player perspective, that's maybe they get lucky one week and score a touchdown that they had no business scoring. But 7 points could actually legitimately swing a matchup. So he's averaging 7 points per game more against the good teams if we discount that Jacksonville explosion. Like I said, it seems like a lot of the hype surrounding Mixon last year was from the fact that Cincinnati kept throwing out really bad quarterbacks and they just didn't want to get them killed, so they just kept giving the ball to Mixon every game. I've made this argument over and over and over again with Fournette. So if you remember, Jacksonville shoved the ball into Fournette's stomach over and over and over and over last year, despite him not being incredibly efficient. But yeah, they just kept giving him the ball. But Indianapolis, or no, not Indianapolis, what the hell am I saying? Cincinnati did the exact same thing to Joe Mixon last year, and they went 2-14. So the Bengals giving Mixon the ball over and over and over again does not make Mixon good. It makes the Bengals 2-14, and it's what made them get Joe Burrow. So the Bengals are not competing for the playoffs this year, and we knew that they wouldn't be competing for the playoffs. I don't think anyone realistically expected them to be able to compete with Pittsburgh and Baltimore. I don't think anyone expected Pittsburgh to be undefeated, but here we are. And I don't know if you guys remember, but Vegas had the Bengals as the single lowest win total for 2020. So, I mean, I guess we expected them to be pretty bad. I mean, unless you were delusional, you knew that they weren't going to be good this year. But honestly, what's happening now this season is kind of the best case scenario for the Bengals. They're mediocre at best, but they still have a lot of young guys showing out. And yeah, I'd be very encouraged if I was a Bengals fan right now. Joe Burrow's playing well. T. Higgins looks pretty good. But here's the deal with Joe Mixon for the rest of the season. So it seems like it's very realistic that they only win one or two more games, which would put them at 4 or 5 wins, I think, for the year. So let me actually check this real quick. Okay, so they're 2-6-1 right now. In the AFC North, that is not going to make the playoffs. Actually, in a stacked AFC, that's not going to make the playoffs. What am I even saying? So there is a very legitimate chance that I know that his status has kind of been up in the air. People say he's going to practice, he doesn't, and then Zach Taylor for like 6 weeks now has been saying, oh, he's day to day. They paid $13 million to this guy in the offseason. There's a very legitimate chance that next year they believe they're ready to compete, and they could shut him down for the rest of the year. Because what sense does it make to play him? I know that teams and front offices will never tank, but I mean, it wouldn't really be the worst thing in the world if they sat out their bell cow running back to maybe get a higher pick. I mean, I know they likely won't, just because they definitely want to get Burrow, reps, playing time, and good reps above all else, as opposed to moving up a few spots in the draft. But what I am saying, it's kind of like Carolina. Like, I don't think the Panthers will legitimately think it's the worst thing in the world if CMC is shut down for the rest of the year. So the only running backs going in front of him at this point, I believe this was either July or August, were Christian McCaffrey, Zeke, Saquon, Kamara, and Cook. Now, I don't know about you guys, but if I could throw literally anything to move up that's not outrageous, I would do that 1,000 times out of 1,000. Joe Mixon probably won't be viewed as the same asset next year, except if Cincinnati is literally competent at all. They're going to draft an O-lineman, or maybe Jamar Chase, but I think they'd rather have an O-lineman, and they're going to protect Burrow. So a lot of the hype in the offseason will be, oh, look, they've improved the O-line. Well, guess what? They drafted Jonah Williams in 2019, and I know he didn't play last year, but if there was any semblance that Joe Mixon could still kick ass in a year where their passing game is legitimately good, couldn't it have been, this year? I don't know. What I'm going to say is I hope Joe Mixon proves me wrong. I hope that I look like a complete asshole for saying that he's overrated and that he's overvalued, and that people in Dynasty League should not take him, as far as his price tag is concerned. But yeah, just let me know what you think in the comments. Do you think Joe Mixon is completely overrated, completely overvalued, and, is not the bell cow running back we all thought he could be at Oklahoma? Or do you think that he's still as talented as he showcased he was in college? And do you think the Bengals are misusing him? Do you think they still suck ass? Do you think Joe Burrow's not the guy? Do you think T. Higgins is a bad receiver? Do you think AJ Green is still good? Just let me know your thoughts about the Bengals in the comments section down below. Anyways, guys, follow me on Twitter. Link is in the description below as well. Anyways, guys, have a good day, and peace out.